You know, something landed on my desk, well, digitally speaking, this week that really caught my eye. It's this lens, and there's some serious buzz around it. People are even maybe calling it the new standard for a specific camera system.
Okay. Which one are we talking about?
It's for the Fuji GFX system. We've got a couple of really good video reviews here, hands-on takes from photographers who've actually used it.
Ah, okay. Always good to get past the marketing spiel and hear from people in the field.
Exactly. So our mission today is like to cut through that hype. Let's figure out what really makes this lens tick, where it shines, and maybe where it might not be the right choice for you.
Sounds like a plan. That new standard label always makes me curious. What exactly is the lens?
Right. Let's dive in. It's a 55 millimeter prime lens. And the kicker, it has this incredibly wide f1.7 aperture.
Wow, f1.7 on medium format.
Yeah, specifically for Fujifilm's GFX medium format cameras. And one of the reviewers really hammered this point home. It's apparently one of the brightest, fastest lenses you can actually get for that system right now.
That is seriously fast. I mean, the depth of field control you get with that on a GFX sensor and the low light possibilities.
Huh?
It's pretty exciting.
Totally. And just to give everyone a reference point, if you're used to shooting full frame 35 millimeter cameras, this 55 millimeter on the GFX sensor, it works out to roughly the same field of view as a maybe 43 or 44 millimeter lens.
So slightly wider than a standard 50.
Exactly. Just a touch wider than that classic nifty 50 that so many photographers love and find really versatile, for everyday stuff, portraits.
Right, that makes it feel familiar then. Not some weird exotic focal length. It should feel pretty natural to pick up and shoot with.
That's the idea. So you get that kind of familiar perspective, but combined with the whole medium format look and, well, that crazy f1.7 aperture.
Okay, sounds great on paper. Let's get into the real world stuff. How does it actually feel to use? What did the reviewers say about handling?
Good question. So first thing both reviews mentioned straight away. It's definitely bigger and heavier than Fuji's other lens around that focal length, the 50 millimeter f3.5 pancake lens.
Not surprising. Given the f1.7 aperture, more glass means more weight.
For sure. But interestingly, one reviewer who paired it with the GFX 102 body, they said it actually felt pretty well balanced. Like, yeah, it's got heft, but it wasn't, ridiculously front heavy or anything.
Hmm.
They even compared it to, I think it was a 105 millimeter f1.4 lens for a different system, saying this Fuji felt more manageable than that one. So heavy, yes, but maybe not too heavy for professional use.
That's a helpful comparison. Balance is so important, especially when you're holding that setup all day.
Agreed. Build quality also came up. One source described it as, solid, a mix of plastic and metal parts.
Okay.
And crucially, weather sealing was mentioned, which honestly you'd kind of expect at the price point. We're talking around $2,300 US.
Yeah, definitely need weather sealing at that price. Makes it a much more practical tool if you're shooting outdoors or in less than perfect conditions.
And for people who like physical controls, good news.
Yeah.
It has a proper aperture ring.
Oh, nice. With clicks.
Yep, with those nice tactile clicks at third stop increments. And it also has a lock, so you can flick it into A mode for automatic aperture control easily.
Love a physical aperture ring. Just feels right.
And the manual focus ring, described as very smooth.
Good.
However, it wasn't all perfect on the handling front. One review did flag that the autofocus motor, its response could feel a bit jerky when shooting video.
Ah, okay. Not ideal for video.
And they also saw noticeable focus breathing, where the framing shifts slightly as you rack focus. That can be a real pain for videographers.
Definitely. Focus breathing is a big one for video shooters. So maybe not the top choice if video is your primary focus.
Could be a factor, yeah. Let's dig into that autofocus a bit more for stills, though. They mentioned it uses an internal DC motor. One reviewer even said they could sort of feel it working inside the lens.
Not uncommon with some DC motors. Was it fast, though?
Not accurate. Well, on the newer GFX 102, one photographer found it generally pretty quick and effective, especially for portraits and, street photography. Said it kept up well with people moving and the camera's eye tracking.
That eye tracking performance is key, especially with the shallow depth of field at f1.7. Good to hear it worked well on the 102.
Right. But while it was generally accurate, that same source did describe the speed as only average.
Average, meaning?
Meaning it might not be the best choice for really fast-moving stuff. Think, action sports. They suggested it needed more testing there, but the initial impression was maybe not its strong suit.
Okay, so good for portraits, street, maybe not so much for trackside shooting.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So interestingly, that same reviewer did say it seemed better, faster than the GFX 80mm f1.7 lens in terms of
Oh,
autofocus.
that's a useful comparison for GFX users. The 80mm f1.7 is known for having slightly more, let's say, deliberate autofocus.
Right. So better than the 80, but maybe still not lightning fast for extreme action. And this actually led to a really interesting point one reviewer brought up. How would this lens perform on older GFX bodies?
Ah, without the fancy new AF algorithms in the 102.
Exactly. Especially trying to nail eye focus when maybe you and the person you're photographing are both moving slightly. That shallow f1.7 depth of field is very demanding. The reliability they praised on the GFX 102 might not translate perfectly to, say, a GFX 50S.
That's a really critical consideration for anyone not using the latest body. The lens performance might be quite dependent on the camera's AF system, something to definitely keep in mind.
Absolutely. Okay, let's switch gears to arguably the most important part, image quality, starting with sharpness and contrast.
The moment of truth.
Well, in the center of the frame, both reviewers were basically unanimous. Outstanding sharpness, excellent contrast, even resolving all, 102 megapixels of that sensor.
That's impressive. Really speaks to the optical design if it's holding up that well in the center 102 MP.
Definitely. But when you look towards the edges and corners, one review found it lacking sharpness at f1.7.
Ah, the corners. Often the Achilles heel of fast lenses.
Yeah, they mentioned some specific bleed-tinted ghosting that was hurting the contrast out there.
Okay. Does it get better stopped down?
It does. Apparently, it improves quite a bit by f2.8, and by f4, you're getting excellent sharpness right across the frame, corner to corner.
Right. So a bit of a trade-off wide open. You get that amazing center sharpness and isolation, but for landscapes or architecture where you need edge to edge, you'll want to stop down to f4 or so.
Seems like it. And both reviews also mentioned it stays sharp pretty well down to about f11. After that, around f16, you start to see that softening effect from diffraction.
Standard diffraction behavior. Good to know the optimal sharpness range is quite wide, though, up to f11.
Okay, what about other image quality bits? One of the reviews, more of a lab-style test, did show some barrel distortion, straight lines bowing outwards a bit.
Pretty typical for a fast prime around this focal length, usually correctable.
And also fairly strong vignetting dark corners when shooting wide open at f1.7. But again, that improves as you stop down. The corners brighten up gradually.
Again, common characteristics.
Yeah,
Lens correction profiles in software like Lightroom usually handle that stuff pretty easily these days.
true. What about close-up performance for those macro-ish shots?
Yeah, how does it do near its minimum focus distance?
It did well. Good image quality even at f1.7 close-up, apparently. The minimum focus is 50 centimeters, by the way. Contrast gets better by f2, and it's like perfectly sharp by f2.8, even when focusing close.
That's great news. Adds to the versatility. Means it's useful for more than just distant subjects. Good for details, tighter portraits.
Yeah. However, one area got marked down a bit, flare resistance.
Oh, really? How bad?
One reviewer found it was a noticeable weakness. Saw distinct flaring, like on both sides of bright lights in the shot, and extra glare if the light source was near the edge of the frame.
That's a bit disappointing for a first-party Fuji lens. Flare control is usually pretty good.
Yeah, they seemed a bit surprised too, so something to definitely watch out for if you're shooting into the sun or with strong lights around.
Duly noted. What about other aberrations like coma?
Ah, yes, coma, that weird skewering of lights in the corners. It was present at f1.7, kind of blue tinted. But the good news is it apparently cleaned up really well by f4, pretty much gone.
Okay, so another reason to stop down a bit for things like astrophotography, maybe?
Could be. And by f4, instead of coma, you start getting little sun stars. They mention the sun stars don't get really defined or noticeable until about f11, though, and stronger at f16, f22.
And the quality of the sun stars. Any comments?
One reviewer just mentioned wishing Fuji's medium format lenses in general produced slightly bolder, more dramatic sun stars, but that's often down to personal taste.
Very subjective, yeah. Some people love them sharp and pointy, others prefer them subtle.
Okay, now for something that got rave reviews, the bokeh, the out-of-focus rendering.
Ah, the magic word for portrait shooters. How is it?
Both reviewers were just gushing, described it as beautifully smooth, really natural looking, not busy or distracting at all.
That's what you want from a fast prime, especially on medium format. Creamy backgrounds.
Exactly. One reviewer did make an interesting comparison to the 80mm f1.7 again. They pointed out that while both are fast, The 55mm being wider naturally produces slightly less background blur.
Makes sense. Longer focal length compresses more.
Right. So with the 55mm, maybe a bit more of your subject stays in focus, like
Yeah.
the tip of the nose in a portrait might still be sharp, whereas the 80mm might blur it out more. Just a subtle difference in rendering.
Good detail. And the lens has 11 aperture blades, right? Rounded ones?
Yep, 11 rounded blades, which definitely helps contribute to that smooth circular bokeh, especially in the highlight.
Crucial for that pleasing look.
And here's another really strong point, maybe a bit technical, but important. Longitudinal chromatic aberration, low-key. That color fringing you sometimes see in front of or behind the focus plane?
Yeah, the purple and green fringing can really mess up bokeh quality.
Well, apparently it's incredibly well controlled on this lens, like virtually non-existent, even wide open at f1.7.
Wow, that is impressive for f1.7. Controlling low TA is tough in fast lenses. That definitely helps achieve that clean, smooth bokeh they were talking about.
No doubt. It means those out-of-focus highlights look much cleaner, more natural. A big win for image quality.
Okay, sounds like optically, aside from maybe the corner sharpness wide open and the flare,
Hmm.
it's performing really well.
Seems that way. Now, let's loop back quickly to that new standard idea. Where did that come from?
Right, the marketing angle.
One of the sources explained Fuji's rationale. Apparently, they're calling it that partly because the physical size of the lens barrel is roughly the same as the diagonal measurement of the GFX 102MP sensor itself.
Huh, that's specific. What's the thinking there?
The idea or implication is that designing a lens with that specific size relationship to the sensor helps optimize how light hits the sensor across the entire area, minimizes optical compromises, vignetting maybe, and lets you get the absolute maximum performance out of that high-res sensor.
Interesting. So it's like saying this lens is perfectly scaled for the sensor, a sort of ideal physical match to maximize potential.
That seems to be the suggestion behind the new standard moniker, a technical justification.
Fascinating. Okay, beyond the lab tests and specs, how did it feel in actual shooting? Do the reviewers talk about just using it?
Yeah, definitely. One photographer, the one testing it with the GFX 102, said something pretty striking. They ended up using this 55mm f1.7 for like 90% of their shots during the review period.
90%. Wow. Even with other lenses available.
Yeah, they mentioned having other options like 100, 200mm, a 250mm prime, even the smaller 50mm f3.5, but they just kept reaching for this 55mm.
That says a lot about its versatility and appeal in practice.
Absolutely. And they specifically highlighted how useful that f1.7 aperture was in darker situations. Being able to shoot at lower ISOs, keep shutter speeds up, just opened up possibilities.
The low light capability is a huge draw for an aperture that wide.
For sure. And combined with that familiar, slightly wider than 50mm field of view and the ability to get that shallow depth of field, they found it super versatile. Great for portraits, street shooting, just general use.
It sounds like it really hit a sweet spot for that particular reviewer.
It really seems like it did. So, okay, let's try and wrap this up. Summing up our deep dive here. This Fuji GFX 55mm f1.7 looks like a really impressive lens overall.
Seems like it. High performance, where it counts for many people.
Yeah, you've got that killer center sharpness, really beautiful bokeh, and that super bright aperture, which is fantastic for low light and subject separation.
But with some caveats.
Right. It's not cheap. It's definitely bigger and heavier than some alternatives. The corner sharpness needs stopping down from f1.7, and the autofocus, while decent, might not be up to par for really high-speed action. Flare resistance was also flagged.
A set of trade-offs, as with
Yeah.
most gear.
Exactly. But the overall image quality, especially once you stop down just a little bit for those corners, seems top-notch. And that new standard label, whatever you think of the marketing, does suggest Fuji sees this as a really key lens for getting the most out of their big sensors.
It definitely feels like a lens aimed squarely at photographers, prioritizing that ultimate image quality, the shallow depth of field look, and low light performance, maybe willing to accept the compromises on size, weight, and bleeding edge AF speed.
Well put. And that kind of brings us to the final thought, really, for you listening. Thinking about how you shoot, what you prioritize, how important is that absolute corner-to-corner sharpness wide open? Do you need autofocus that can track a speeding bullet?
Or is the appeal of that slightly wide perspective, combined with the incredible f1.7 aperture for low light and that gorgeous bokeh, does that outweigh the size, the weight, and the cost for what you do?
Maybe digging into some sample images online, comparing shots from this 55mm f1.7 versus, say, the 80mm f1.7 could really help clarify things if you're in the market for a fast prime for your GFX, which one really fits your vision.
Definitely worth considering how those subtle differences in focal length and rendering might play out in your own work. Food for thought.